My family supported my brother after he cheated with my girlfriend, unknowingly signing up for our ex-girlfriend to destroy their business and future. The phone call that incinerated my family's world came on a Tuesday. I remember it was just after lunch and I was looking over some quarterly reports at my desk, the kind of boring, predictable work that has defined my life since I decided to step away from the family business. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I almost let it go to voicemail. We hadn't spoken in weeks, not since our last stilted conversation that ended with her telling me I needed to build a bridge and get over it. But some instinct, maybe a lingering sense of filial duty I hadn't managed to extinguish yet, made me answer. Her voice wasn't just panicked. It was fractured. It was the sound of a person's reality cracking apart at the seams. She was sobbing, barely coherent, a string of words tumbling out that didn't make sense at first. "It's gone, Lincoln. It's all gone." "Mom, slow down," I said, my own voice calm, detached. "What's gone?" "The business, the accounts, everything. The bank called. There's nothing left. 35 years of your father's work, just gone." I leaned back in my chair, the spreadsheet on my monitor blurring into meaningless numbers. I felt a strange quiet settle over me. It wasn't shock, it wasn't horror. It was the chilling, hollow click of the last piece of a puzzle locking into place. I didn't need to ask how. I didn't need to ask who. I already knew. In that moment, I knew with the certainty of a mathematical proof that this was the work of one person, Maya Martin, my ex-girlfriend, the woman who just 3 months ago had left me for my own brother. "Where is Santiago?" I asked. The question was flat, devoid of emotion. My mother's sob caught in her throat. "He's here, with his father. They can't understand what happened. Maya's gone. Her phone is off. The company she had us invest in, it doesn't exist." I closed my eyes, so this was it. The day the bill came due for a debt my family had been racking up for years. They had made their choice, and now they were living with the consequences. My father, 60 years old, and my mother, 58, had just watched their entire life's work, a construction empire named Murphy & Sons, evaporate into thin air. Their retirement, their legacy, their future, all of it gone. And the architect of their ruin was the very person they had welcomed into the heart of our family right after she had ripped mine out. To understand why my first feeling wasn't sympathy, you have to go back 4 months. 4 months ago, I was a 28-year-old man in a serious one-year relationship with Maya Martin. She was smart, beautiful, charismatic, the kind of woman who could charm a room with a single smile. I thought we were building a future together. But for a few weeks, something had felt off. A distance was growing between us. She was spending more and more time with my family, specifically with my younger brother, Santiago. He was 26, the golden boy, the heir apparent to the family business. He'd always been my parents' favorite, the one who could do no wrong while I was the stubborn, independent one who forged his own path. I tried to ignore the warning signs. I told myself I was being paranoid. Santiago was my brother. Maya was my girlfriend. They were just getting along. But one evening I came home early and found them in our living room. They weren't doing anything overtly wrong, but the way they were sitting together, the way they fell silent when I walked in, the look that passed between them, it was electric with a secret. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night I confronted Maya. She denied everything, of course. She called me jealous and insecure. But the lies were thin and I saw right through them. The next day I confronted Santiago. He tried to play it off at first, but he's a terrible liar. He crumbled and admitted they had developed feelings for each other. He swore nothing physical had happened, but the emotional betrayal was so much worse. I was gutted. My own brother. The woman I loved. I called a family meeting. I thought perhaps naively that my parents would see the profound betrayal for what it was. I laid it all out for them, the late-night texts I'd found, the secret lunches, the way they acted when they thought I wasn't looking. I expected support. I expected them to be furious on my behalf. Instead, I was met with a wall of disappointment directed entirely at me. My father, a man whose approval I'd chased my entire life, just shook his head. "Lincoln, you're making a scene. Santiago's your brother. You two have to work this out." My mother was worse. She put her arm around Santiago, who was sitting there looking like a kicked puppy. "Feelings can't be helped, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and soothing, a tone she hadn't used with me in years. Then she turned to me, her expression hardening. "You're the older brother, Lincoln. You need to be the bigger man here. Don't put us in the middle of this. Don't tear this family apart over a girl. Be the bigger man." The words echoed in the silent room. I looked at Santiago, my brother, the chosen one, being comforted after betraying me. I looked at Maya, who was standing by the window watching the whole scene with an unnerving calm. And I looked at my parents, who had just made it crystal clear where their loyalties lay. They always had. Santiago was the future of Murphy and Sons construction. He was the legacy. I was just the other son, an inconvenient variable in their perfect family equation. In that moment, something inside me broke. It was the last thread of hope that they would ever see me as his equal. They weren't asking me to be the bigger man out of some noble principle. They were telling me to get out of the way to swallow my pain so that Santiago could have what he wanted without any unpleasantness. So I did. I stood up and said, "You're right. I will be the bigger man." I looked directly at Santiago. "She's all yours." Then I turned to Maya. "We're done." I walked out of that house, and in many ways I walked out of that family. A month later, as expected, Santiago and Maya were officially a couple. I kept my distance. I focused on my own career, my own life. I built my walls high and strong. I did exactly what they told me to do. I got over it. I let Santiago have her. And now, just 3 months after that, the call came. Maya hadn't just stolen my brother's heart. She had used it as a key to the family vault. She had played her part perfectly, charming my parents, dazzling them with her supposed financial acumen. My brother, blinded by whatever fantasy she'd sold him, had led the charge. He had championed her. He had convinced them. And my parents, in their lifelong habit of trusting their favored son's judgment above all else, had walked right into the trap. They had handed over 35 years of hard work to a predator because the person vouching for her was the one they always believed in. So as I sat there listening to my mother's world crumble through the phone, I didn't feel a surge of familial duty. I didn't feel the need to rush over and save them. I felt a cold, bitter, and deeply satisfying sense of vindication. It was a terrible feeling, an ugly feeling, and I owned every last ounce of it. They had made their bed. They had chosen their son. They had told me to be the bigger man and step aside. I did, and this was the result. This was the price of their choice. They didn't just lose their money. They lost it because of a fundamental flaw in our family that I had been pointing out for years, a flaw they always told me I was imagining. Now that flaw had a name, and it was Maya Martin, and she had just burned their entire world to the ground. For a full week, the silence was deafening. The first call from my mother was frantic, the words gone everything, and Maya tumbling out in a choked, incoherent stream. After that, my phone remained dark. I expected a follow-up, a desperate plea, a demand for help, maybe even an angry accusation, as if this were somehow my fault. But there was nothing, just a heavy, ringing void where a family used to be. I spent those 7 days in a strange state of limbo. I went to work, I paid my bills, I made coffee every morning. On the surface, my life, the one I had built separate from Murphy and Sons construction, continued its steady rhythm. But underneath, a current of grim satisfaction churned. Every time I thought of my parents, 60 and 58 years old, staring at a bank account with a zero balance, I remembered my father's dismissive wave. Every time I pictured my 26-year-old brother, Santiago, realizing his great romance was a meticulously planned heist, I heard my mother's voice telling me to be the bigger man. I didn't reach out. Why would I? They had drawn the line in the sand 4 months ago in our living room. They had chosen their side. I was just respecting the boundary they had established. The truth is, a part of me was morbidly curious about how they would handle it on their own. For his entire life, Santiago was the one who got things done, the one with the charm, the one they trusted to carry the family name. The golden child. Well, the family legacy was now a crater in the ground. I wondered what the golden child would do now. I got my answer exactly 1 week later. It was a Tuesday night. Rain was lashing against my apartment windows, a miserable, persistent drizzle that matched the mood I'd been marinating in. I was reheating some leftover takeout when there was a knock at my door. Not a confident knock. It was hesitant, almost a scratch, like a stray animal hoping for shelter. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that it was a delivery to the wrong address. I opened the door, a question already on my lips, and the words died in my throat. It was Santiago. But it wasn't the Santiago I knew. The brother I grew up with stood tall, with an easy confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was the captain of the football team, the one who always had a witty comeback, the one who walked into a room and owned it. The man standing on my doorstep looked like a ghost wearing my brother's skin. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and he was staring at his own feet as if he couldn't bear to look at me. He looked broken. For a long moment, we just stood there. The only sound was the rain and the hum of my microwave. I didn't invite him in, I just waited. Finally, he looked up and the sheer desperation in his eyes was staggering. "Lincoln," he whispered, his voice cracking. Can I come in?" I didn't answer. I just stepped back from the door, leaving it open. He shuffled inside, dripping water onto my entryway floor. He didn't seem to notice. He just stood there looking around my small, tidy apartment as if it were a foreign country. It was so different from the sprawling family home he still lived in, or the home he used to live in. "They're selling the house," he said, as if reading my mind. "They have to. The bank. There's nothing left. The business accounts are frozen. Dad's retirement portfolio. It's just gone. It was all tied up in the same transfer." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. I felt nothing. It was like listening to a news report about a stranger's misfortune. "I know," I said. "Mom called." He flinched at my cold tone. "Right. Yeah." He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking lost. "Link, I messed up. I messed up so bad." You think the words were sharper than I intended. He finally met my gaze again, and I saw tears welling in his eyes. The sight was so jarring, so alien, that it almost knocked me off balance. I had seen Santiago cry exactly twice in our lives, once when he was 7 and broke his arm falling out of a tree, and once when his dog died. Seeing it now from this man was like watching a statue weep. "She played me," he choked out. "She played all of us, from the very beginning." He started talking and it all came spilling out. The confession. He told me how over the last 3 months, Maya had transformed in his eyes. She wasn't just a beautiful woman, she was a genius. She talked about markets, about emerging opportunities, about leveraging assets. She used words and phrases she'd clearly practiced, weaving a fantasy of a secure, work-free future for our parents. She'd shown him prospectuses for a high-yield real estate venture, glossy pamphlets for properties that probably didn't even exist. She was so convincing, Link, he pleaded, his voice thick with shame. She made it sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. A way for Mom and Dad to retire 10 years early, to travel, to have everything they ever wanted. She said it was time-sensitive, that the window was closing. I stayed silent, letting him unravel. She made me feel like a partner, like I was the one bringing this incredible thing to the family. I was so proud. I went to Dad. I pitched it to him myself. I told him this was it. This was the move that would set us up for life. He sank down onto the small bench I kept by the door, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. "Dad trusted me," he mumbled into his palms. "He's 60 years old. He's worked his whole life. And he trusted me. He didn't even question it. He said if his son thought it was a good idea, then it was a good idea." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The one time our father's blind faith in his favorite son was put to the ultimate test, it led to his complete and utter ruin. The transfer happened a week before. Before we found out, Santiago continued, his voice muffled. They went to the bank with her, signed all the papers, liquidated everything. Murphy and Sons Construction, the retirement funds, all of it. They signed it all over to her shell corporation. Willingly, they handed it to her. He finally looked up, his face a mess of regret and self-loathing. And I stood right there next to them, smiling. I thought I was securing their future. I thought I was being the man he always wanted me to be. He fell silent. The story was over. The damage was done. Maya Martin, 27 years old, was gone, along with 35 years of my family's work. Then Santiago did something that surprised me even more than the tears. He got up, walked over to me, and stopped a few feet away. The desperation in his eyes had sharpened into a specific, targeted plea. "Link," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm not here for money. I know you have your own savings, and I swear I will never ask you for a dime. That's not what I need." I raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you need, Santiago?" "I need you," he said, and the words hung in the air between us. "I need your brain. You were always the smart one, the logical one, the one who sees things other people miss. I'm not smart like you. I'm good with people, with building things. But this is a puzzle, and you're the only one who can solve it." It was the most astonishing thing he had ever said to me. For the first time in our lives, he was admitting that I possessed something he didn't, something that had actual value. He was asking for my help in research and logic, in tracing the untraceable. He wanted me to help him understand how this happened, to find the digital breadcrumbs that might lead to Maya. He wanted me to do what he couldn't. And as I stood there looking at the broken shell of my younger brother, the golden child begging for the help of the outcast, I felt the last 4 months of pain and anger coalesce into a single hard point of clarity. I let the silence stretch out, watching the hope flicker in his eyes. Then I gave him my answer. No. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room like a gunshot. Santiago physically recoiled as if I'd slapped him. What link, please? No, I repeated, my voice colder this time, harder. Let me be perfectly clear, Santiago. You are standing in my apartment soaking wet because of a series of choices. Not just your choices, theirs too. I took a step closer, and for the first time, he was the one who seemed intimidated. 4 months ago, I stood in our living room and told our parents that my girlfriend was cheating on me with my brother. I presented them with a problem, a betrayal. And what did they do? Did they look at the facts? Did they support their older son? No. They chose you. They chose to smooth things over for you. I could see the memory playing across his face, the shame deepening. Mom looked me in the eye and told me to be the bigger man. Dad told me not to tear the family apart. They weren't asking me to forgive. They were telling me to get out of the way, to make myself small so that your happiness wouldn't be inconvenienced. They made a judgment call. They decided that your feelings were more important than my reality. They decided your judgment was the one to trust. I gestured around my small apartment. So I did what they asked. I became the bigger man. I walked away. I removed myself from the family equation just like they wanted. I left you to it. I let you have her. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. This is the result of that choice. This is the outcome. You convinced them to trust your judgment, and they did. You vouched for her. You championed her. You all made a decision to back the wrong horse. You didn't want me in the middle of it then, and I have absolutely no intention of putting myself in the middle of it now. I stepped back, my point made. This is your mess, Santiago. You mom and dad. You made it together. You can clean it up together. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, speechless. The last flicker of hope in his eyes died out, replaced by a profound, desolate understanding. He finally saw it. He finally understood the consequences of that day 4 months ago. You asked for my expertise? I said, walking to the door and opening it. Here it is. My logical assessment is that you are on your own. Good luck. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked out into the rain, a defeated man who had lost everything, including the last brother he thought he could turn to. As I closed the door, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt empty. The vindication that had kept me warm for a week had burned itself out, leaving nothing but cold ash. I had won. I had been proven right in the most catastrophic way imaginable. And now I was truly, completely alone. That should have been the end of it. Closing the door on my brother was supposed to be like closing a book. The story was over, the moral was clear, and I was free. But the silence in my apartment was deafening. The cold ash of my vindication didn't offer any comfort. For days I tried to move on. I went to work, I hit the gym, I ordered takeout and watched movies. I did all the normal things a 28-year-old guy does. But my mind kept replaying the scene. Not Santiago at my door, but the phantom image of my parents aged 60 and 58 staring at a bank account that read 0. My anger, the thing that had fueled me for months, was gone. And in its place was something else, something I hadn't expected, a deep, unnerving curiosity. This wasn't a simple case of a gold digger finding a rich family. This was different. My family wasn't bled dry over years. They were felled in a single, precise stroke. 3 months. That's all it took for Maya to go from being my ex-girlfriend to the architect of my family's complete financial ruin. It was too fast, too clean. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity, it was a professional demolition. And the engineer in me, the part of my brain that sees systems and schematics, couldn't let the puzzle go. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. I had to understand the blueprints of my own family's destruction, so I began. Late one night, I poured a glass of whiskey, sat down at my computer, and opened the digital ghost of my life with Maya Martin, a 1-year relationship. I started scrolling back through old messages, photos, emails. At first, it was just painful. Pictures of us smiling on a hike, a text from her saying she loved me. But I forced myself to look past the emotion and search for the data. I was looking for the cracks, and slowly I started to find them. There was a story she told me about her family being dirt poor, a sob story that made me feel protective of her. But I found a photo from her college days she'd sent me once, and in the background, a corner of a painting was visible. On a whim, I ran a search. It was a piece by a fairly well-known regional artist worth 5 figures. Not something you'd find in a struggling household. A small lie, but it was a crack. Then I found another. She'd claimed to have a degree in finance, which is what gave her so much credibility with my parents. I looked up her university's alumni records. She had attended, yes, but she dropped out after 2 semesters. Her major was art history. The crack widened. It went on like this for hours. Little inconsistencies, polished anecdotes that fell apart under the slightest pressure. A carefully constructed identity that was nothing more than a facade. She hadn't just lied to my family. She had been lying to me from the very beginning. To go further, I needed something. I didn't have the details of the transfer, the name of the shell corporation she'd used. Swallowing my pride, I picked up the phone and called Santiago. He answered on the first ring, his voice a desperate, hopeful whisper. Lincoln. I cut him off before he could start. I'm not helping you, I said, my tone flat and transactional. I'm satisfying my own curiosity. I need the name of the shell company Maya used, and I need you to email me every single document the parents signed. Do not call me. Do not ask me questions. Just send the files. There was a pause, then a choked, okay, anything, Link. I'll send it now. The documents arrived a minute later, and there it was, Apex Horizon Real Estate Ventures, LLC. A generic, meaningless name. But a quick search showed it was registered just 2.5 months ago with a single director, Maya Martin. The address was a P.O. box, a dead end. But as I scanned the incorporation papers, I saw something that made my blood run cold. She hadn't just targeted our money, she had studied us. She had studied our family's deepest, most painful flaw. The entire investment proposal she'd written for my parents was filled with language tailored specifically for them. It spoke of legacy, of family, of securing the future for the next generation of Murphy men. But the most damning part was how it was structured. It required 2 signatures, of course, my mother's and my father's. But it also had a line for a family endorser. A legally meaningless flourish, but psychologically brilliant, and whose name was typed neatly on that line, Santiago Murphy. That's when it all clicked into place. Maya hadn't just stumbled upon a wealthy family. She had performed a full diagnostic. She saw the core dysfunction we had all lived with for decades, my parents' absolute, unshakable favoritism for Santiago. He was the golden child, the one destined to take over Murphy & Sons construction. My independence, my career in a different field, was always seen as a subtle rebellion. Santiago's judgment was law. My objections were just noise. Maya saw this. She saw that my father, a man who had built a 35-year business on shrewd decisions, would abandon all logic if his favored son told him to. I wasn't just an ex-boyfriend to her. I was a variable she needed to control, a threat. As long as I was in the picture, there was a chance I could raise an alarm that my logical, skeptical nature would poke holes in her story. So she didn't just break up with me. She surgically removed me from the equation using the most efficient tool she had, my own brother. My investigation became an obsession. I used the name of her shell company as a starting point, cross-referencing it with public records, searching for similar corporate structures. For days, I barely slept, and then I found it. A news article from a small-town newspaper in another state dated 3 years ago. It detailed a local businessman who had lost his modest retirement savings in a can't-miss investment scheme. The amount was smaller, the method less sophisticated, but the pattern was there. The article named a person of interest who had left town shortly after, a young woman with a different last name, but the grainy photo attached was unmistakable. It was Maya. I leaned back in my chair, the screen glowing in the dark room. The stakes had just changed. This wasn't just about my family's money anymore. This was who she was, a serial predator, and she was getting better, more ambitious with each target. My family was her masterpiece. If I did nothing, there would be another family after mine, and another. I finally had it all, the timeline, the motive, the proof of her methods and her history. It wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about justice. It was about stopping her. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Santiago's name. It was time to call a family meeting. I summoned them to my apartment 2 days later. My parents looked like they had aged a decade. My father, always so proud and imposing, was slumped and gray. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Santiago looked like a ghost. They sat awkwardly on my couch, the one they'd always said was too small in the apartment they called a temporary phase. I didn't offer them drinks. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I stood before them, a laptop connected to my TV, and I began. I told you I wouldn't help, I said, my voice calm and clinical. And I haven't. This wasn't for you, it was for me. But you need to see it. For the next hour, I laid it all out. I presented it like a case study, a post-mortem of a failed system. I showed them the lies Maya told me during our relationship. I pulled up the alumni records showing she was an art history dropout, not a finance prodigy. I showed them the article about her previous con. With every slide, every piece of evidence, the air grew heavier. Then I brought up the final slide. It was a simple timeline. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is the most important part. I showed them the dates. 1 year and 4 months ago, Maya and I start dating. She spends a year getting to know this family. Not just me, all of us. I paused, letting that sink in. 4 months ago, the confrontation. I discover the affair. I come to you. I look directly at my parents, and I tell you what's happening. And you make a choice. You choose to back Santiago. You tell me to be the bigger man. The shame on their faces was palpable. Now look at this, I said, highlighting a new date on the timeline. The day after the confrontation. That is the day Maya Martin began researching how to create a shell corporation. 2 weeks after that, she officially starts dating Santiago. She didn't choose him because she loved him. She chose him because on that day you all proved something to her. You proved that Santiago was the key. You proved that his endorsement was more powerful than facts, more powerful than loyalty, more powerful than your other son's pain. He wasn't her partner. He was her tool. Santiago made a strangled noise, burying his face in his hands. I wasn't just dumped, I continued, my voice unwavering. I was identified as a security risk to her operation. I was the one person who might question her numbers, who might see through the facade. So she had me removed, and you all handed her the scalpel. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's quiet sob. The truth in all its devastating clarity had finally landed. They saw that their money wasn't just stolen, it was surrendered. They had been so blinded by their favoritism for one son that they had willingly participated in the destruction of their own lives and the exile of the other. The family's hierarchy, the one that had defined my entire life, didn't just crack, it shattered into dust right there in my living room. My father looked up at me, his eyes filled with a kind of agony I had never seen. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a ragged whisper. You were right. He shook his head, tears welling. I'm sorry, Lincoln. Not for the money. I'm sorry for all of it, for making you feel like you were second. It was the apology I had waited my entire life to hear, and it had come at the cost of everything he had ever built. The aftermath was bleak. The money was gone for good, wired through a dozen international accounts and vanished. Maya Martin was a ghost in the wind. My parents' financial ruin was absolute and permanent. My victory wasn't in getting the money back. It couldn't be. My victory was quieter. I compiled my entire investigation, every document, every piece of evidence, every detail of Maya's history and methods into a single encrypted file. I sent it anonymously to 3 different international fraud enforcement agencies. I didn't know if they would ever catch her, but I knew I had turned her from a predator into prey. Her life of easy cons was over. From now on, she would always be looking over her shoulder. She would be the one living in fear. A few weeks later, I found a small, modest apartment for my parents in Santiago. I paid the first few months' rent and a security deposit from my own savings. As I handed the key to my father, I made it clear. This is a loan, I said, not unkindly, not a gift. We'll work out a payment plan when you're on your feet. It wasn't about charity. It was about establishing a new foundation, one built on reality and respect, not on dysfunctional obligation. For the first time, we were equals. As I walked away from their new humble home, I felt a sense of closure I never thought possible. I hadn't saved the family business. I hadn't restored their wealth, but I had exposed the truth, and in doing so, I had liberated myself. They had asked me all those months ago to be the bigger man. And in the end, I was. I walked away, I built my own life, and when they fell, I gave them a hand up, not back to where they were, but to a new beginning, my beginning. And I never looked back.